The audience expected jokes. They expected smiles. They expected Prince Harry to sit across from Jon Stewart, talk about his book, make a few self-deprecating remarks, and leave with applause. What they didn't expect was silence. Because sometimes the most uncomfortable moments don't start with shouting. They start with a question that sounds polite and lands like a trap. Tonight, on The Daily Show, Prince Harry would realize something too late. Jon Stewart wasn't there to argue with him. He was there to understand him, and that turned out to be far more dangerous. The studio lights glowed softly against the deep blue backdrop of The Daily Show. Behind them, the illuminated digital map pulsed faintly, a quiet reminder of a world constantly watching, constantly judging. Prince Harry sat upright at the desk, jacket buttoned, shoulders squared. He looked calm, confident, almost relieved. Across from him, Jon Stewart leaned slightly forward, hands resting near his mug, his expression neutral, attentive, not confrontational, the kind of look that made guests feel safe, for now. The audience applauded as Jon turned toward the camera. "Welcome back," Jon said with a familiar warmth. "My guest tonight is Prince Harry." Applause again, polite, curious, respectful. Harry nodded once, lips pressed into a practiced smile. He'd done this dozens of times. Interviews were familiar territory. He knew how to control a room. Jon picked up his mug, took a small sip, then turned back to Harry. "First of all," Jon began casually, "thank you for being here." Harry inclined his head. "Thank you for having me." "So," Jon continued, "you've been busy. Book tours, interviews, conversations about identity, trauma, family, media." He smiled slightly. "A lot of conversations." Harry let out a soft chuckle. "That's one way to put it." The audience laughed lightly. Jon nodded. "I want to start simple. When you decided to write your book, what was the goal? What did you want people to understand?" Harry didn't hesitate. He'd rehearsed this answer. "I wanted to tell my truth," he said. "For years, others told it for me. The media, the institution, people who didn't live my life. I wanted to finally speak for myself." Jon listened carefully, eyes steady. "That makes sense," he said. "Taking control of your own narrative?" "Yes," Harry replied quickly. "Exactly." Jon leaned back slightly. "And did you expect the reaction to be this intense?" Harry smiled again, but this time it was tighter. "I think people project a lot onto me," he said. "I'm used to it. There's always been anger, judgment, assumptions." The audience murmured softly. Jon nodded slowly. "Right, because you're not just a person. You're a symbol." Harry's eyebrows lifted. "That's part of the problem." Jon raised a hand gently. "We'll get there." A few chuckles rippled through the crowd. Jon glanced down at the book on the desk, fingers resting on the cover, but he didn't open it. "You've spoken a lot about the pressure of growing up in the public eye," Jon said. "About not having a normal childhood." Harry's posture shifted just slightly. This was familiar ground. "I didn't have the freedom most kids have," he said. "Every mistake became a headline. Every emotion became entertainment." Jon nodded. "That's real, and that kind of scrutiny can break people?" Harry exhaled. "Exactly." There was a pause. Not awkward, intentional. Jon looked up. "But here's something I've been thinking about." Harry waited. "You talk about the media as this relentless force," Jon said. "And you're not wrong, but you're also incredibly present in it." A small ripple of laughter passed through the audience. Harry's smile flickered. Jon continued smoothly. "Interviews, podcasts, documentaries, books. You criticize the system while using it very effectively." Harry shifted in his chair. "That's because I'm trying to change it from within," he said. "You can't dismantle something by staying silent." Jon nodded again. "Fair point." The room relaxed. Harry relaxed. Jon smiled slightly. "See, we're agreeing already." The audience laughed louder this time. Harry chuckled, though his eyes didn't fully soften. Jon leaned forward a little. "Let me ask you something else. When people criticize you, not the tabloids, but regular people, what do you think they misunderstand most?" Harry didn't answer immediately. "I think they don't see the human cost," he said finally. "They see privilege, not pain." Jon's gaze stayed fixed on him. "Do you think," Jon asked carefully, "that sometimes they see both? The laughter stopped. Harry's jaw tightened just a fraction. "I think empathy is lacking," Harry said, "especially when it comes to mental health." Jon nodded, but didn't smile this time. "Mental health is serious," he said, "and it deserves respect." Harry leaned forward slightly, encouraged. "But," Jon added calmly, "people also struggle when someone who had immense protection, wealth, and opportunity speaks as if suffering erases all of that." A few audience members shifted in their seats. Harry's expression hardened. "I've never said privilege cancels pain," he replied sharply. Jon raised his hands gently. "I'm not saying you did. I'm saying that's how it can sound." Harry opened his mouth, then closed it. For the first time, there was a noticeable pause. Jon glanced briefly at the audience, then back to Harry. "We'll take a quick break," he said smoothly. "When we come back, I want to talk about responsibility." The word lingered in the air. Harry leaned back, eyes narrowing slightly as the lights dimmed. For the first time that night, he wasn't smiling. The applause after the commercial break was thinner, not hostile, not yet. Just cautious. Prince Harry sat a little farther back in his chair now. His hands were clasped together, fingers interlocked tightly enough that the knuckles had gone pale. He kept his eyes on Jon Stewart as the lights brightened again. Jon didn't rush. He let the silence breathe. "Welcome back," Jon said calmly. "I'm still here with Prince Harry." A polite ripple of applause passed through the studio. Jon turned slightly toward Harry, his voice steady, almost gentle. "Before the break," he said, "we were talking about responsibility." Harry nodded once. "Yes." Jon leaned forward, resting his forearms on the desk. "You've spoken a lot about accountability, from institutions, from the press, from your family, and that's fair. Power structures should be questioned." Harry's chin lifted slightly. "Exactly," Jon continued, "but accountability is uncomfortable because it's symmetrical. It doesn't just go one way." Harry's eyes narrowed just a bit. "What do you mean?" he asked. Jon picked up the book at last. He didn't open it. He didn't quote from it. He simply rested his palm on the cover. "You've made deeply personal stories public," Jon said. "Stories about your family, about your brother, about your father, about your childhood." Harry straightened. "They were already public," he said quickly. "I didn't create that exposure." Jon nodded. "You didn't create it, but you expanded it." The audience went quiet. Harry exhaled sharply through his nose. "I told my truth." Jon tilted his head slightly. "Your truth, or the truth?" The question landed harder than any joke could have. Harry's lips pressed into a thin line. "There isn't just one truth," Harry said. "There are lived experiences." "Of course," Jon replied. "But lived experiences intersect with other people's lives, especially when those people don't get to respond." A murmur spread across the audience. Harry leaned forward now, voice firmer. They had decades to respond, to listen. Jon didn't argue. He waited. "Let me ask this differently," Jon said. "When you talk about privacy, about how damaging exposure can be, do you see the contradiction?" Harry's jaw tightened. "I see survival," he said. "I see someone who had to speak before being destroyed by silence." Jon nodded slowly. "And do you think your brother would describe your silence the same way?" The studio froze. Harry blinked. Once, twice. "That's not fair," he said sharply. Jon's voice remained even. "It's a real question." Harry's shoulders tensed. "You're asking me to speak for him now?" "I'm asking you," Jon replied, "whether you ever paused and thought, what happens to the people I leave behind when I tell my story this way?" Harry looked away for the first time that night. The camera caught it. The audience caught it. Harry turned back, eyes flashing. "You're framing this like I acted recklessly." Jon shook his head slightly. "No, I'm framing it like actions have gravity." Harry let out a short, humorless laugh, easy to say from a desk. A few gasps rippled through the crowd. Jon raised his eyebrows, not offended, intrigued. "You're right," he said. "It is easy to ask questions from a desk." Harry leaned in now, voice edged with frustration. "You don't know what it's like to be born into something you can't escape." Jon met his gaze. "No, but I do know what it's like to be judged for choices you can make." Silence. Harry shifted in his seat. Leaving was my choice. Jon nodded. Telling everything was also your choice. Harry's mouth opened, then closed. For a brief moment, he looked less like a prince and more like someone cornered by his own words. You're implying I did this for attention, Harry said coldly. Jon shook his head. I'm implying that intention doesn't cancel impact. The audience murmured again, louder this time. Harry leaned back abruptly. This feels less like a conversation and more like a prosecution. Jon smiled faintly, but there was no humor in it. I don't need to prosecute. Public reaction does that on its own. Harry scoffed. Public reaction is fueled by misunderstanding. And yet, Jon said quietly, you keep feeding it. That was the moment. Harry's composure cracked, not explosively, but visibly. His breathing changed, his fingers unclasped, then clenched again. So what do you want from me? Harry snapped. An apology? Silence? Regret? Jon looked at him steadily. Perspective? The word hung between them. Harry shook his head. You're sitting here dissecting my life like it's a case study? Jon nodded once. That's what happens when life becomes content. The audience inhaled as one. Harry stared at Jon, disbelief flickering across his face. I came here expecting a conversation, Harry said. And you got one, Jon replied, just not the one you rehearsed. Harry pushed his chair back slightly, not standing, not yet. But the movement didn't go unnoticed. Jon glanced down at his notes, then back up. When we come back, he said calmly, I want to talk about something you rarely address directly. Public trust. Harry didn't respond. He just stared straight ahead as the lights dimmed again. This time, the silence wasn't polite. It was charged. The applause after the break never came. The lights rose, the cameras rolled, but the audience stayed quiet, not confused, not distracted, alert. Prince Harry sat upright now, one arm resting rigidly on the desk, the other gripping the arm of his chair. His jaw was set, eyes fixed forward. Jon Stewart noticed it immediately. He didn't smile. He didn't joke. He didn't even welcome the audience back. Instead, he spoke softly, the kind of softness that makes people lean in. Before the break, Jon said, we were talking about trust. Harry didn't respond. Jon continued anyway. You've said many times that the media destroyed your family, that it twisted stories, monetized pain, and erased context. Harry nodded sharply. Because it did. Jon held his gaze. So, help me understand something. Harry sighed, impatient. Go on. Jon folded his hands on the desk. Why is it wrong when they profit from your story, but justified when you do? The question landed like a dropped plate. A few people in the audience audibly reacted. Someone whispered, "Oh." Harry's eyes narrowed. That's a false equivalence. Jon didn't flinch. Is it? Harry leaned forward. They lied. I corrected. Jon replied instantly. You selected. Harry scoffed. You're splitting hairs. No, Jon said. I'm splitting incentives. The room felt smaller now, the walls closer. Even the Daily Show mugs looked out of place, like props in the wrong scene. Harry exhaled sharply. You keep framing this as hypocrisy. Jon nodded. Because that's how audiences experience it. Harry's voice hardened. Audiences don't know what it's like to be hunted from birth. Jon raised an eyebrow. Neither do most people you've criticized. Harry froze for half a second, then he laughed. Short, sharp, dismissive. That's rich, he said, from someone whose biggest risk is a bad headline. A ripple moved through the audience. Not applause, not laughter, discomfort. Jon tilted his head slightly. You think criticism is risk-free? I think you don't understand consequence, Harry shot back. Not like I do. Jon leaned back in his chair for the first time. Let's talk about consequences, he said. Harry crossed his arms. You left your role, Jon continued. You left your country, you left your family, all valid choices. Harry nodded. Finally, Jon raised a finger. But you didn't leave the platform. Harry's lips parted, then pressed together. You didn't leave the influence, Jon went on. You didn't leave the titles when they were useful. You didn't leave the spotlight when it paid. The audience shifted, heads nodded. A few people murmured approval. Harry's face flushed. So, Now I'm opportunistic? He snapped. Jon shrugged lightly. You're selective. Harry leaned forward aggressively. You're judging my motives. Jon met him head on. You're selling them. That did it. Harry slapped his hand lightly against the desk. Not loud, but sharp enough to echo. This is exactly why people don't trust media figures like you, he said. You pretend neutrality while feeding cynicism. Jon's expression didn't change. I don't pretend neutrality, he replied. I practice accountability. Harry scoffed. For everyone except yourselves. Jon paused. Then, deliberately, he removed his glasses and placed them on the desk. The audience went dead silent. Let me be very clear, Jon said. I don't dislike you. I'm not attacking your trauma. I'm not dismissing your pain. Harry looked unconvinced. But, Jon continued, when you position yourself as the moral authority while refusing to accept scrutiny, you don't look brave. Harry clenched his jaw. You look insulated. The word hit harder than any insult. Harry shook his head slowly. You're talking down to me. No, Jon said quietly. I'm talking through the performance. The room felt electric now. Harry stood halfway out of his chair, then sat back down, a visible struggle between impulse and restraint. So what is this? Harry demanded. An ambush? Jon shook his head. A mirror. Harry laughed again, louder this time. You think you're holding a mirror? Jon replied calmly. I think the audience is. The camera cut to the crowd. Faces weren't smiling. They were watching Harry. Harry noticed. His confidence wavered, just for a second, then hardened into defiance. Well then, he said coldly, maybe I don't need to sit here and justify my existence. Jon nodded once. That's your choice. Harry pushed his chair back farther this time, not leaving, but preparing. Jon glanced at him. One last question. Harry looked back, eyes blazing. Make it quick. Jon's voice was steady, almost gentle again. When this ends, the interviews, the books, the documentaries, who are you without the conflict? Harry opened his mouth. Nothing came out. The silence stretched, long, uncomfortable. Harry stood up. The audience gasped. Jon didn't stop him. Harry looked down at him, anger and disbelief mixing in his expression. You don't get to define me, Harry said. Jon looked up calmly. I didn't. You did. Harry turned toward the wings of the stage, then stopped. He hesitated. Not gone yet, but closer than ever, and everyone in the room knew it. Harry stood there longer than anyone expected, not storming off, not speaking, just standing, frozen between pride and doubt. The studio lights felt harsher now, the silence heavier. Even Jon Stewart didn't move. He didn't gesture toward the chair. He didn't try to soften the moment. He let it breathe. Harry finally turned back, eyes sharp, voice clipped. You know what the problem is? He said. You think this is entertainment. Jon shook his head slowly. I think this is accountability. Harry let out a short, humorless laugh. Of course you do. He took a step closer to the desk. Not aggressive, deliberate. I came here in good faith, Harry continued. I didn't come here to be psychoanalyzed by a comedian who's built a career pretending to be above the mess. A few audience members gasped. Others leaned forward. Jon didn't interrupt. You mock institutions, Harry said, voice rising. You mock leaders. You mock traditions. And then you act shocked when people don't trust anything anymore. Jon finally spoke, calm, controlled. I mock power when it refuses responsibility. Harry snapped back instantly. And who decides that? You? Jon answered without hesitation. The public. Harry's face hardened. The public doesn't know me, he said. They know headlines, clips, narratives. Jon nodded. And yet you keep feeding them. That was the breaking point. Harry slammed his hand flat on the desk, louder this time. I am done being reduced, he said. Done being interrogated. Done being framed as some caricature for your audience. Jon didn't raise his voice, didn't move an inch. Then stop selling yourself as one, he replied. The audience erupted, not in cheers, not in boos, but in a low, shocked murmur that rolled through the studio like thunder. Harry stared at Jon. For a moment, it looked like he might say something reckless. Then he smiled. Not warmth, not humor. A smile of finality. "You know," Harry said, "this is exactly why people walk away from conversations like this." Jon tilted his head. "Or why they're finally having them." Harry reached down, grabbed the edge of his jacket, and straightened it with an almost ceremonial calm. "No," he said. "This isn't a conversation." Jon waited. "This is a trap," Harry finished. Jon nodded once. "If honesty feels like a trap, that tells you something." Harry turned toward the exit. The audience went completely silent. No applause, no boos, just shock. He took 2 steps, then stopped. Without turning back, Harry spoke one last time. "For what it's worth," he said, "I expected better." Jon answered quietly, not chasing him, not performing for the cameras. "So did we." Harry froze, just for a fraction of a second. Then he walked off. The camera followed him to the edge of the stage, then cut back to Jon Stewart sitting alone at the desk. The empty chair next to him felt louder than any argument. Jon looked down at his notes, closed them, set them aside. He exhaled slowly. Then he turned to the camera. "Well," he said softly, "that wasn't the ending anyone planned." A ripple of nervous laughter moved through the audience. Jon didn't smile. "But sometimes," he continued, "when someone leaves the room, the conversation finally begins." He paused, long enough for the weight of it to land. "We'll be right back." The lights dimmed, the music came up, and somewhere backstage, a door closed. Not loudly, not dramatically, but permanently. If this conversation made you uncomfortable, curious, or challenged your perspective, that's exactly why we tell these stories. Like the video if you felt the tension. Subscribe for more powerful, no-filter confrontations you won't see anywhere else. And comment below, who should face the questions next? Because silence is easy. The truth never